7. Sweet Home Alabama, Lynyrd Skynyrd, 1974. By the early 1970s, Lynyrd Skynyrd was still fighting to be taken seriously outside the southern rock circuit they'd built with their bare hands. They were loud, they were unapologetically southern, and to a lot of the rock establishment sitting in New York and Los Angeles offices, they were seen as little more than a regional curiosity, a bar band with a big sound and not much national reach. Most people who did know their name knew it for one reason. They were the band that opened for The Who and held their own doing it. But what most people didn't expect was that Skynyrd's next move wouldn't be another guitar showcase. It would be a direct response to one of the most respected songwriters in the entire industry. The song wasn't written in a vacuum. It was written, at least in part, as an answer to Neil Young, whose songs about the American South had struck a nerve with the band's frontman, Ronnie Van Zant. Van Zant reportedly admired Young's music a great deal, even wearing his shirts on stage, but he felt the picture Young painted of the South was incomplete, one-sided. So instead of writing a diss track, in the modern sense of the word, he wrote a rebuttal, wrapped inside one of the catchiest guitar riffs of the decade. That's the myth most people miss. This wasn't a feud, it was a conversation between two artists who respected each other enough to argue in song. Not everyone in the band's camp was convinced this approach would work. There was real concern, at the time, that leaning so hard into regional pride and political commentary could box the band into a corner, that it might alienate listeners outside the South, or worse, get the song dismissed as a novelty. The gamble here wasn't musical, it was cultural. Nobody was sure if a song this rooted in one specific place could ever become something the whole country would sing along to. What makes this entry hold up decade after decade is the sheer construction of the thing. Guitarist Ed King and Gary Rossington built a triple guitar interplay that became a blueprint for Southern rock as a genre, not just a band. Ed King has talked about how the main riff came to him almost fully formed, practically overnight, and how the band recorded the core track in just a handful of takes because the feel was simply right the first time. That kind of lightning in a bottle spontaneity is rare, and it's part of why the track still sounds alive instead of overworked. There's also the backing vocal arrangement to consider, something casual listeners rarely think about, but musicians study closely. The call and response between Van Zant's lead and the backing singers gives the song a conversational, almost church revival energy, which is no accident given how deeply Southern gospel and rock traditions overlapped in bands from that region during that era. It's one of the reasons the song feels communal rather than performative, like a group of friends trading lines around a campfire rather than a polished studio product. The gamble paid off. Far from being dismissed as regional, the song became one of the most recognizable rock songs in American history, a staple that transcended the very North versus South divide it was arguably born from. It reached the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, and, more importantly, it became something bigger than a chart number, a permanent fixture at sporting events, backyard parties, and classic rock radio blocks for the next 50 years and counting. And here's the part that gives this entry its weight. Ronnie Van Zant never got to see just how enormous this song would become for generations far beyond his own. He died in a 1977 plane crash, only a few years after the song's release, long before Sweet Home Alabama became the cultural shorthand for an entire region's pride that it is today. Every time that riff kicks in at a stadium of 80,000 people singing along, it's also, quietly, a tribute to a songwriter who never got to grow old. What's easy to forget, decades removed from the controversy, is how uncomfortable that gamble genuinely felt in the moment. This was a young Southern rock band, barely a few years into their career, effectively telling a music legend that his version of the story was incomplete. It would be like a brand new artist today, publicly pushing back on one of the most respected songwriters of the modern era, in a song, on a debut-level album. That took a kind of nerve that most bands simply didn't have. And yet, by choosing conviction over caution, Skynyrd wrote something that outlived the very argument that inspired it. Today, most people who sing along to it have no idea it was ever a rebuttal to anyone at all. It has simply become the song itself, Bigger than the debate, bigger than the decade, bigger than the band that wrote it. 6. Livin' on a Prayer, Bon Jovi, 1986. By the mid-1980s, Bon Jovi had already tasted some success, but they were still very much fighting for a permanent spot at rock's top table. Their first two albums had done reasonably well, yet critics and even some of their own label executives quietly worried the band might be a one-hit act, remembered for a single song, and then forgotten the way so many hair metal bands of the era eventually were. Jon Bon Jovi and guitarist Richie Sambora knew they needed something undeniable for their third record, or the whole project could stall out. Adding to the pressure was the broader landscape of rock radio at the time, which was crowded with flashy, image-driven bands competing for the exact same slice of airtime. Standing out required more than a good hook. It required a song that could function as a statement of identity, something that told listeners exactly who Bon Jovi was as a band, not just what they sounded like. That's an enormous amount of weight to place on a single track from a group still trying to prove they belonged. Here's the twist almost nobody expects. The song nearly didn't make the album at all. Jon Bon Jovi initially thought it was too simple, too on the nose, and he considered cutting it entirely. It was co-writer Desmond Child who reportedly convinced the band that the song's directness was exactly its strength, not its weakness. The very quality Jon wanted to edit out is the quality that made it immortal. There was genuine tension in the room during those sessions. Rock bands of that era were often expected to lean into either pure aggression or pure spectacle. And a song built around two working-class characters, Tommy and Gina, scraping by on Love and Grit, felt almost too vulnerable, too plain-spoken for a genre obsessed with excess. Some worried it would come across as corny rather than powerful. What turned it from simple into unforgettable was one specific studio decision: the talkbox effect on the guitar intro, an unmistakable sound that instantly signals the song before a single lyric is sung. That effect, combined with Sambora's arrangement instincts, gave the track an identity so distinct that radio listeners could recognize it within half a second of airtime. It's a masterclass in how one small sonic choice can define an entire song's legacy. The risk paid off in a massive way. What started as the song Jon Bon Jovi almost cut became the band's first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100, launching them from promising rock act to arena-filling household name almost overnight. It didn't just top the charts once. Decades later, it remains one of the most streamed and most requested rock anthems at stadiums, weddings, and sporting events across the world. A song that somehow still feels like a group sing-along even when you're hearing it alone in your car. There's something almost poetic in this entry's legacy. A song about two ordinary people refusing to give up became, itself, proof that refusing to give up on an unfinished, almost discarded song can change the entire trajectory of a career. Some songs make you listen. This one makes you believe you can make it through too. Think about how differently this story could have gone. If Jon Bon Jovi had trusted his first instinct and cut the song entirely, the band might have released their third album without a single anchor track. And there's a real chance the label conversations that followed would have looked very different for a group still trying to prove they belonged in rock's upper tier. Instead, the song that almost didn't exist became the very reason the band's name is still instantly recognizable to people who couldn't name a single one of their other tracks. It's a reminder that sometimes the songwriter is the last person in the room who can accurately judge what they've just written. 5. Sweet Child O' Mine, Guns N' Roses, 1987. Going into their debut album, Guns N' Roses had a reputation, but not the kind most bands wanted. They were seen as dangerous, chaotic, more likely to implode than to produce a tender, radio-friendly love song. Axl Rose's vocals were known for aggression and menace, and Slash's guitar work was associated with raw, unpolished fury, not melody built for mainstream airplay. The band's lifestyle offstage only reinforced that reputation. Stories of chaos followed them into nearly every interview and every venue, and much of the industry expected their debut record to be a short-lived burst of shock value, rather than the start of a lasting career. Nobody, least of all the band themselves, was picturing a wedding song classic coming out of these sessions. Here's the twist that catches almost everyone off guard. The song's now iconic opening riff wasn't written with any serious intention behind it. Slash has said, in numerous interviews over the years, that he was simply warming up, almost joking around with a finger exercise, when the rest of the band overheard it and insisted he keep playing it. What became one of the most famous guitar intros in rock history began as something Slash himself didn't initially take seriously. There was real hesitation about including it on the record at all. The band worried a love song, especially one this sincere, would clash with the raw, dangerous image they'd spent years building. Some in their circle feared it would soften their edge right as they were trying to establish themselves as rock's most fearsome new act. What elevated the track from a simple riff into a legendary song was the layering underneath it. Slash's guitar tone, achieved through a specific combination of amp and pedal choices, gave the riff its unmistakable brightness, while Axl Rose's lyrics, inspired by his relationship with Aaron Everly, gave the song an emotional sincerity that stood in sharp contrast to the rest of the album's aggression. That contrast between the tender subject matter and the band's dangerous reputation is exactly what made the song so magnetic. The gamble paid off in a way nobody on the label fully predicted. Far from softening the band's image, the song became their only #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 and one of the best-selling singles of the decade, proving the band could be both ferocious and vulnerable without losing an ounce of credibility. It has since been certified multiple times platinum and is routinely ranked among the greatest guitar riffs ever recorded, studied and imitated by aspiring guitarists in music shops around the world to this very day. There's a quiet irony sitting underneath this entry's legacy. A band that terrified parents and thrilled a generation of rebellious teenagers is now, more often than not, remembered for its gentlest song, one written about love, played at weddings, hummed by people who never owned a single Guns N' Roses record. Sometimes the softest moment in an artist's catalog ends up outliving everything they built their reputation on. It's worth sitting with just how unlikely this outcome really was. This wasn't a ballad band experimenting with a hint of grit for credibility. This was widely considered the most dangerous band in America, at the exact moment they were trying to prove that reputation, choosing to release a love song as their signature statement. If it had failed, it could have been read as a sign of weakness at the worst possible moment in their career. Instead, it became proof that real toughness isn't about avoiding vulnerability, it's about being able to show it and still command the room. Four, Hotel California, Eagles, 1976. By the mid-1970s, the Eagles had already established themselves as one of the defining bands of the California rock sound, known for smooth harmonies and easy breezy hits about sunshine and freedom. That reputation, however, was exactly what the band was quietly growing tired of. They wanted their next album to say something darker, something more critical of the very lifestyle they were famous for celebrating. There was also a shifting lineup to navigate, with Joe Walsh and Don Felder bringing a heavier, more guitar-driven edge into the band's sound than fans of their earlier, softer records were necessarily expecting. That meant this wasn't only a lyrical risk, it was a sonic one too. A band deliberately steering away from the exact formula that had made them famous in the first place, at the height of their popularity, when it would have been far easier to simply repeat what already worked. The twist here surprises a lot of listeners who've sung along to this song for years without ever digging into its meaning. It isn't a song about a literal hotel at all. Co-writers Don Henley and Glenn Frey have described it, across many interviews, as a metaphor for the excess and hollow glamour of the music industry itself, and of Southern California more broadly. A place that looks like paradise from the outside, but can quietly trap the people who chase it. The band that had built its name singing about California's golden promise was now writing what amounted to a warning about it. Turning that concept into a song wasn't simple. There was tension over how abstract or literal the lyrics should be, and real debate over whether audiences who loved the band for its sunny image would accept something this moody and symbolic. Some worried listeners simply wouldn't connect with a song so layered in metaphor when they were used to far more straightforward storytelling from the band. What sealed the song's legendary status was its extended guitar outro, a dual guitar duet between Don Felder and Joe Walsh that runs for well over a minute without a single lyric, something almost unheard of for a song intended for radio. Felder has spoken about composing the central chord progression on a rented beach house 4-track recorder, almost as an experiment, never expecting it would become the foundation of one of the most analyzed guitar passages in rock history. The risk paid off spectacularly. The song became the Eagles' second #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 and eventually won the Grammy Award for Record of the Year, cementing the band not just as hitmakers, but as serious songwriters capable of real social commentary. Decades later, it remains one of the most played classic rock songs on radio stations worldwide, and that extended guitar outro is still taught, note for note, in guitar lessons across the globe as a rite of passage for intermediate players. What's remarkable about this entry is how a song built around disillusionment with fame and excess became, itself, one of the purest examples of long-lasting fame the band ever achieved. The very industry the song critiques ended up embracing it as one of its crowning achievements. Proof that sometimes the most honest thing an artist can do is bite the hand that feeds them, and have that hand applaud anyway. There's an added layer of irony here that rarely gets mentioned. The band members themselves were, by their own later admissions, living out exactly the kind of lifestyle the song was warning against while they were recording it. They weren't outside observers commenting on someone else's excess, they were writing from inside the very machine they were describing, which is likely why the song feels less like a lecture and more like a confession. That honesty, uncomfortable as it may have been to write, is a large part of why the song still resonates with anyone who has ever chased something that turned out to be more complicated than it looked from the outside. Three, Don't Stop Believin', Journey, 1981. Heading into the recording of their 7th studio album, Journey had already found commercial success, but the band was in the middle of a creative transition, adjusting to a new lineup and searching for a signature song that could define this new chapter, rather than simply repeat what had worked before. There was pressure, both from the label and from within the band, to prove that the retooled lineup could still deliver. That pressure was compounded by the sheer number of successful arena rock bands competing for the same audience at the time. Journey needed a song that didn't just sound good, it needed to sound unmistakably like them, distinct enough to cut through a crowded field of similarly polished rock acts, all chasing the same radio slots. Anything less risked the band blending into the background of a genre it had helped popularize. Here's the detail that catches most listeners off guard. The now famous opening line about a small-town girl and a city boy wasn't originally meant to be the beginning of the song at all. Keyboardist Jonathan Cain has explained in interviews that it was actually intended for a later verse, and it was lead singer Steve Perry who insisted on moving it to the very front, recognizing instinctively that it would hook a listener faster than anything else in the draft. A structural instinct, more than a lyrical one, is what gave the song its iconic opening. There was genuine doubt in the room during the writing process. Cain has talked about how his father, upon hearing an early draft, told him bluntly to stop dreaming about being a rock star and get a real job. Cain has said he channeled that exact disappointment, and his refusal to accept it, directly into the song's central theme of holding on to hope against the odds. The song very nearly became a personal anthem of quiet defiance before it became anyone else's. What elevated the track beyond a simple pep talk was its structure, an unusually long instrumental build before the vocals even begin, followed by a chorus deliberately engineered to repeat and swell, practically demanding to be shouted rather than sung quietly. That architecture, combined with Perry's soaring vocal performance, is exactly why it works so well as a closing song at ballparks, weddings, and karaoke bars to this day. The gamble paid off beyond anything the band could have predicted at the time. While it only reached the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 upon release, falling short of the #1 spot, it went on to become one of the best-selling digital rock songs in music history decades later, driven by a massive resurgence through television, film, and streaming. It has been certified diamond in the United States for sales and streaming combined, an achievement almost no rock song from its era can claim, and it remains, by many measurements, the single most streamed classic rock song of the digital era. The legacy here carries a strange kind of justice. A song written, in part, out of a father's blunt rejection of his son's dream became, decades later, the very definition of never giving up on that dream. Every stadium that roars this chorus back at the scoreboard in the final inning is, whether they know it or not, singing along to one man's refusal to stop believing in himself. What makes this entry especially unusual on this list is the shape of its success. Most songs peak in the years right after release and slowly fade from rotation. This one did the opposite. It sat quietly for nearly 2 decades as a well-loved deep cut, before a wave of television placements and a new generation of listeners discovering it through streaming turned it into something even bigger than it was the first time around. It's proof that a song's biggest chapter doesn't always happen when everyone expects it to. Sometimes the real payoff arrives a full generation late, long after the band that wrote it had already made peace with where they thought its story ended. 2. Bohemian Rhapsody, Queen, 1975. Going into the recording of their 4th album, Queen already had a devoted following, but they hadn't yet delivered the kind of song that would establish them as one of rock's most fearless creative forces. Freddie Mercury had been developing fragments of an ambitious piece for years, but nobody, including the band's own label, had any real frame of reference for what he was about to attempt. The twist that still surprises casual listeners decades later is just how unconventional the song's structure actually is. It has no traditional chorus at all, instead moving through a ballad section, an operatic midsection, and a hard rock finale, essentially compressing 3 separate songs into one 6-minute piece. Record executives at the time were reportedly convinced no radio station would ever play something this long or this structurally strange, and they pushed hard for the band to cut it down significantly. The band's decision to refuse that request was an enormous gamble. Committing to a 6-minute rock opera, at a time when hit singles were expected to run around 3 minutes, risked the song being ignored entirely by radio programmers who simply wouldn't have the airtime for it. There was very real concern the label's warnings would prove correct, and the ambitious piece would sink without a trace. Guitarist Brian May has spoken about how firmly the band held their ground during these disagreements, refusing to trim a single section even as executives pushed back repeatedly. For a band still building its reputation, standing that firm against the very people funding the record was not a small act of confidence. It was a genuine risk to the band's relationship with their own label, taken because Freddie Mercury believed completely in what he'd written. What made the impossible possible was the operatic middle section, built from as many as 180 separate vocal overdubs, recorded across multiple studios, layered together with a level of technical precision that pushed the recording technology of the era to its absolute limit. Producer Roy Thomas Baker has described the tape itself becoming almost transparent from being run through the machines so many times during the overdubbing process, a physical toll from the sheer ambition of what the band was attempting. The gamble paid off in a way that changed the music industry itself. Radio DJ Kenny Everett famously ignored the label's instructions and played the song repeatedly on his show, regardless of its length, generating so much public demand that the label had no choice but to release it as a single, exactly as the band intended. It became Queen's first #1 hit in the UK, held that position for 9 consecutive weeks, and remains one of the best-selling singles of all time worldwide, a song still regularly voted among the greatest of any genre, in any decade. Freddie Mercury never got to witness the song's full second life. Its use in film decades after his passing introduced the operatic masterpiece to entirely new generations who'd never heard it on the radio, proving that some songs are simply too far ahead of their moment to be fully understood until long after they're written. Great art doesn't just get discovered once. Sometimes it waits patiently to be discovered all over again. It's worth pausing on just how much creative confidence this entry required from everyone involved. Every single member of the band had to agree to defend something that broke nearly every rule of commercial songwriting at the time, knowing full well that if the label's skepticism turned out to be correct, they would have spent enormous studio time and money on a song that radio simply refused to play. There was no safety net here, no fallback plan if the gamble failed. And yet, 40+ years later, this remains one of the most instantly recognizable pieces of music ever recorded. Proof that the songs which refuse to follow the rulebook are sometimes the very songs that end up rewriting it.
Nothing really matters.
1. Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin, 1971.
Don't be alarmed now.
By the time Led Zeppelin began work on their untitled 4th album, they had already built a reputation as one of the most powerful live acts in the world, yet critics at the time were still dismissing them as little more than a loud, blues-based hard rock act without much depth or ambition. That dismissal sat uneasily, with a band that knew it was capable of far more. Adding to that pressure, the band's previous album had received a noticeably cooler critical reception than its predecessors, which meant there was a real question hanging over the group as they entered these sessions. Could Led Zeppelin still evolve, or had they already peaked creatively? Deciding to leave the album entirely untitled, with no band name printed on the cover at all, was itself a bold, almost defiant statement, a group choosing to let the music alone answer the question critics were asking about them. What surprises so many people, even lifelong fans, is that this now legendary song began not as a rock anthem at all, but as a quiet acoustic piece, written largely by Jimmy Page, on a cold night at a remote Welsh cottage called Bron yr Aur, with Robert Plant reportedly writing a significant portion of the lyrics in a single sitting, almost as if the words had simply been waiting inside him. A song that would eventually become one of the loudest, most triumphant closings in rock history, started life in near total silence.
Don't you know now?
There was serious internal debate about the song's structure. An 8-minute track that begins as a folk ballad and gradually builds into a full electric rock climax defied every convention of what a single or even an album centerpiece was supposed to sound like at the time. Some around the band worried the shifting structure would confuse listeners, expecting a more straightforward rock song from a band known primarily for its raw power. What turned that structural risk into something transcendent was the song's famous guitar solo, one of the most analyzed and imitated solos in rock history, recorded by Jimmy Page across 3 separate takes before he selected the version that appears on the final record. That solo, combined with John Bonham's drums entering only gradually as the song builds, gives the track its unmistakable sense of steady, inevitable ascent, as though the song itself is climbing toward something. The gamble paid off beyond anything the band could have imagined.
And the forests will echo me wonder.
Despite never being released as an official single, the song became one of the most requested and most played tracks on rock radio in history, a status it built entirely through album sales, live performances, and word of mouth, rather than chart placement. It remains, by numerous industry estimates, the most played song on classic rock radio of all time, logging an almost unimaginable number of radio spins across the decades since its release, all without ever chasing a single chart position. And that's the detail that makes this final entry so fitting to close on. A song built entirely around patience, starting soft, building slowly, refusing to rush toward its climax, became the most enduring rock song ever recorded, precisely because it never tried to be an instant hit. It simply trusted that if it built itself well enough, the world would eventually climb the whole stairway with it. There's a reason radio programmers, generation after generation, keep reaching for this song specifically when they want to mark an ending, a milestone, or a moment that deserves weight. Few songs in the history of recorded music are built with that kind of architecture in mind. A piece designed less like a single and more like a journey, with a beginning that asks for quiet attention and an ending that demands full volume. That structure is exactly why it has never needed a chart position to prove its greatness. Its greatness was never up for a vote. It simply became true over time, the same way all the entries on this list did: one spin, one radio station, one generation at a time. And there you have it, the 7 most played songs of all time, Rock Legends Edition. From a southern rebuttal that became a stadium anthem, to an 8-minute acoustic to electric climb that never needed a chart position to become immortal, these 7 songs prove something simple. The songs that last longest usually aren't the ones engineered to be hits. They're the ones written honestly, built patiently, and left alone long enough for the whole world to eventually catch up to them. Notice the pattern running underneath every single one of these stories. Almost none of these songs arrived exactly as we know them today. A riff nearly discarded as a warm-up joke. A verse moved from the middle of a song to the very front. A love song a dangerous band almost refused to release. A 6-minute rock opera a label begged to be cut in half. Time and time again, the song that became legendary wasn't the one the artist was most confident about. It was the one they were most afraid to commit to. Maybe that's the real lesson buried inside a countdown like this one. The songs that end up mattering the most to millions of strangers are so often the very same songs their own creators almost didn't have the nerve to finish. And maybe that's worth remembering the next time one of these 7 comes on the radio. You're not just hearing a hit, you're hearing a song that, at some point, almost never existed at all. If your favorite classic rock anthem didn't make this list, drop it in the comments. We read every single one, and honestly, half our future countdowns come straight from what you tell us down there. Until next time, keep the volume up and the legends playing.